As a genre, beat-em-ups are sort of the rampaging id of the video game landscape, boiling the concepts of the medium down to its very essence. There's enemies coming at ya, and you gotta hit 'em. This is the DNA of most of the iconic works of gaming's early generations, and that fundamental appeal extends to pretty much any activity that tests your reactions, from pinball to whack-a-mole. The thing that all these games have in common is precision. They become addicting because they reward furious reaction speed. I had lots of kind words for the previously chronicled beat-em-up DYNAMITE COP, not only because it's vividly colorful and ridiculously silly, but because it's responsive, smooth, and fluid, which fires those caveman brain synapses. Soul Fighter is a different story. Developed by a small French studio called Toka, with assistance from a company fittingly called Piggyback Interactive, Soul Fighter was built out of the 3DFX Glide API, the same graphics engine that made NFL Blitz and NBA Showtime look so vivid and cartoony. And just like NFL Blitz, the actual character models are impressively enormous. And the plot, as explained to us at length by this king doing a hilarious Sean Connery impression,
shall tell you the tale of the blackest period in my kingdom's history,
is inexplicably convoluted and appropriately silly. An evil queen has put a spell on a medieval kingdom, turning its inhabitants into vicious creatures. 3 warriors have escaped the curse, and now have to run through town kicking everyone in the f***ing face. Is he still talking? The problem here is that Soul Fighter is not a well-designed game structurally. The fluidity that is necessary to keep the rhythms of a good beat-em-up just isn't present here, as your characters, even the lithe-seeming spy Sayomi, handle like they're standing in mud, with the turning radius of an 85 Buick. The auto camera makes it difficult to see who you're attempting to hit, so I constantly had to keep taking these circuitous routes to get the opponents back on camera so I could deck them. Adding to this frustration is how needlessly complex the controls are to perform simple actions. The game has so many villains on screen at one time that it's essential that you pick up available health and weapons bonuses, including, hilariously, fully cooked chickens, as quickly as possible. But where DYNAMITE COP or Fighting Force just lets you collect them by simply running over them, the same is not true of Soul Fighter. I assumed this meant I had to hit the main A button as I passed, but that wasn't it either. And I died a number of times just trying to find the extremely specific, apparent angle that would allow me to pick up this goddamn chicken. Eventually, I got so tired of dying like a numbnuts that I looked up the manual and discovered that you have to get angled correctly so it shows a green circle, then hit A while hitting down, which is way too many steps for something that needs to happen in a split second. Even more frustratingly, the game is structured like a Metroidvania, of all things, where you can't advance to the following levels until you kill absolutely every person on the stage, so anyone you may have simply run past or easily missed thanks to the floating camera still needs to be taken care of. Also, please dig one of the least helpful guide arrows I've ever seen in a video game. This extremely vague pointing hand that never quite seems to actually be pointing in the direction you're actually supposed to go, while simultaneously flashing like an overloaded NES sprite to get your attention. One thing I didn't even process with DYNAMITE COP until I had to play Soul Fighter was the fact that DYNAMITE COP, and Die Hard Arcade before it, is 3-dimensional, but structures it with a mostly stationary camera, like looking into a static diorama you can run around in, something like Power Stone that gives you the equivalent of a cinematic one-shot to make sure everything you do is always visible on screen. Soul Fighter swirls around like Michael Bay at his worst and just adds to the frustration. A lot of the reviews at the time follow along these lines, that it might be good for a rental if you were really into Dynamite Cop, but that it isn't very good, and the swirling camera is a chief reason why. IGN's review even mentioned that it made them physically ill, comparing it to riding the Beast at King's Island 6 times in a row. Part of that frustration is just the sheer number of enemies on screen, which should be a point of pride for how little the frames drop, but also clearly defines another big, obvious problem with this game. Beat-em-ups should always be two-player. The style of the genre dictates a kind of charming stupidity that only really works if you're getting to be stupid with someone else. Die Hard Arcade understood that so well that they gave a partner to a character whose main defining feature in the work the game is based on is how singularly alone he is. Soul Fighter gives you 3 options for a player character and then strands you with one of them alone, but gives you dozens of enemies to combat. One of the funniest things I keep seeing in old reviews in regards to the Dreamcast's release schedule, putting out so many games in Japan so far ahead of time, is that reviewers denigrate the games they're reviewing by telling you to wait for another game they've already seen, or even have just heard about, that won't be out for 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 months. TNN Motorsports Hardcore Heat had that happen to it in favor of Sega Rally Championship 2, a game that I still haven't gotten to months later on this project. Well, Soul Fighter gets it in both directions. It's compared unfavorably to the recently released Dynamite Cop, but also repeatedly compared unfavorably to a hack-and-slash game called Draconis: Cult of the Worm, which won't be released in the US until June of 2000. Soul Fighter came out around Thanksgiving '99, and it's bad enough that it's getting, trust me, you can wait 7 months, something better will be along then. Contrasting Soul Fighter to Dynamite Cop really shows how wrong you can go with a beat-em-up game. One gives you a silly-ass storyline, but also brisk pacing, intuitive controls, clear spatial camera work, wacky weapons, and tells you to invite a friend. The other gives you an equally ludicrous storyline, but gives it messy structure, sluggish controls, nauseating camera work, overcomplicated button presses, and says you're grounded by yourself until you clean your room. I play games like Soul Fighter, so you don't have to. Leave this one back in the 90s. Next time, have you ever wanted to have, like, a bunch of little legs and a gun